So good morning, everyone. That was quite the introduction. If I didn't know myself, I'd be impressed by me. But I know. I tried to think of a joke when I got up here, and then this guy over here told me I'd probably bomb, and then it goes downhill from there. So I won't even make a joke. I'll just apologize for not having a video. I wasn't able to make it here logistically, but I hate to see myself on video anyway, so that probably worked out. I have about 15 minutes, so what I will do, I will walk you through what is called our Grid Electric Sector Modernization Plan. It's a 700-page document. It's very dense. It covers all of Massachusetts in the 4 planning regions. Obviously, I'm not going to give you all 700 pages of content today, but I would encourage you to take a look at it, and particularly the region that covers southeastern Massachusetts, because it really gives you insight into the current state of the system, the challenges that we face, and particularly the plans for grid modernization, for electrification, accommodation, and the way we're going to enable heat pumps and electric vehicles across our territory. And it gives you insight into how we are planning for load over the next 10 years, which is that's the first thing we have to deal with, right? Load growth over the next 10 years, and then we spin forward to look at what 2050 needs are. So the Electric Sector Modernization Plan is really driven by the state's greenhouse gas emissions goals in the Clean Energy Climate Plan. And as you see, the state is looking to reduce carbon emissions by at least 85% by 2050. And these are real aggressive goals, 2025, 30%, 2030, 50%, and 2050, 85%. And this is across all sectors: electric sector, transportation sector, building sector, no respecting of sectors. And so this really puts Eversource in squarely in the sights of the state, stakeholders, towns, and cities such as yourselves who are looking to electrify, and we are now the enablers of those electrification ambitions. And we take this really seriously because we understand that as electricity goes, so goes the economy. And that's our sacrosanct obligation to provide a safe, reliable service. So I'll walk through several facets of the plan, starting with the money, right? Because that's always the question that's been asked: how much does this cost? The plan is a 10-year plan, but right now we've published it in 2 segments: the first 5 years and the next 5 years. So focusing on the first 5 years, it's a plan that totals about $5.5 billion with a B over the next 5 years. And that is the core of the plan. And there are incremental investments that total $0.6 billion. But to break it down, one of the hallmarks of this plan is that Eversource has always been looking at load growth over the next 10 years. That's what we do. That's what my team does. We forecast, we understand what the drivers are in terms of large commercial buildings, in terms of EV chargers, in terms of solar that's going online, energy efficiency. We take all these into account, and we forecast the load over the next 10 years, and then we decide where to build infrastructure to accommodate that load. If the state had never conceived this idea of an ESMP, we would have done most of this plan anyway. So that's the first thing I want you to understand. The core investments are the things that we have in place to accommodate your load growth over the next 10 years. The ESMP really addresses what happens beyond the next 10 years to get to the state's 2050 goals. Okay? So when you look at this chart, you see it's broken down into planned core investments for peak load capacity, basic business, reliability, new customer. These are the things that we do, and that's about, like I said, most of the plan, most of the $5 billion of the plan. And then there are planned clean energy investments. These include the DER SIPs. You may have heard the term, SIPs, Capital Investment Projects. And these are large DER-driven substation projects to accommodate the DER that's being proposed in southeastern Massachusetts. And I'll show you what these are in a little bit more. There's some AMI, there are EV infrastructure upgrade plans, and grid modernization plans, and that's the next tranche. And then the new proposed investments, which is really what we put before the DPU for approval, right? The rest of the plan, we told the DPU, this is stuff we're going to do anyway. We don't need you to approve it. We have an approved rate case and a K-bar mechanism that covers that recovery. What we need you to approve is the new proposed investments, which is a grid technology plan that allows us to begin looking at how we can harness customer side DER and other technologies to offset capacity needs. Resiliency plan, a comprehensive resiliency plan, which is very pertinent to this area, which looks at how historical storms has affected the grid and determines at a zonal level, at a very tactical level, how do we upgrade? Which segments do we underground? Where do we put steel poles? Where do we reconductor? Where do we trim the trees more aggressively or remove trees? The resiliency plan takes that into account and proposes to increase and harden the system by about 15%. We didn't go all the way, but we are taking it step by step, starting with the most impactful measures first. And then there's a new SIP plan. So in addition to the 7 SIPs that we proposed, 1 in Marion Fairhaven that has been approved, and 5 others which are waiting for approval by the DPU, we propose an additional 7 SIPs in the ESMP. And one of these is a new substation between New Bedford and Freetown. It will be called the East Freetown SIP. And that will allow us to integrate about 45 to 50 megawatts of DER at that new station. And that would be a really game changer in the area. And then the continuation of the EFI plan. The ESMP starts with the current state of the system. Where are we now? And the key point to note is that there is very little headroom, and by headroom I mean extra capacity, to enable electrification and clean energy resources in all communities. And this is a very high level look. And yet, as you can see, it's broken down by region. The southeastern Massachusetts region is more relevant to you. We have 29 substations, 29 bulk distribution substations. These are infrastructure facilities that convert from 115 kV transmission voltage down to 23 kV or 13 kV, which is used to route voltage, lines to your communities. So we have 29 of these, and they serve about 90,000 environmental justice communities. The average substation headroom is about 8 MVA. And to put it in context, 8 MVA is a couple of very large commercial buildings. And so as you can see, there's not a lot of headroom to electrify the communities. And this is where our focus really began, to look at what do we need to do across all our communities to electrify, but also not to leave out the disadvantaged communities, to ensure that they are also brought along in this energy transition. The driver for the ESMP, the driver for just about anything we do as a company is load, right? That's what's growing. Every time you buy a new toaster, a new television, 85-inch television, it increases the load in your home. Every time you buy a new EV, if you convert to heat pumps, it increases your load. Right now, the load on our system, Massachusetts-wide, is about 6.1 gigawatts, 6,100 megawatts. By 2035, we expect that load to grow to 7.4 gigawatts. So there'll be about a 20% increase in load over the next 10 years. That 20% increase is driven mostly by large commercial buildings in the Metro Boston area, and in southeastern Massachusetts, driven mostly by EV, believe it or not. So there are distinct drivers in different parts of the state. But we are a summer peaking system right now, right? And so we see our peak load in the summer, a lot of it driven by air conditioning. After 2035, we will be switching to a winter peaking system, because as you look at that trajectory from the common base load to 2035, you see that the components are the trend load, large electric customers, and some transportation, which is the EV. And then about 2035, there's a very distinct change in the components of the load. That is because the winter load will be growing slowly over the next 10 years, driven by heat pump adoption and EV charging in the mornings. We expect that by 2035, we will switch to a winter peaking system. So instead of having a summer afternoon peak load, it'll probably be a winter morning peak load. And when that happens, the load really begins to escalate. And we expect to get up to 15.4 gigawatts by 2050, a 150% increase in load. That is frightening. And this is where we really begin to understand. At a high level, that's what's happening. When you begin to drill down to different areas, to each region, to each town, to each substation, we begin to see drastic overloads at substations across our territory. And that is where we need to begin to plan for infrastructure. So what's driving the near-term demand in SEMA? I said before, it's an electric vehicle. You can see across our territory the waterfall of the load, starting with the trend load, and there's some EVs superimposed on that. Step loads, which are large commercial buildings, typically 500 kilowatts to 1 megawatt, depending on the voltage. Energy efficiency, which is an offset, so that actually reduces the demand. And we have an excellent energy efficiency program. And PV, solar, which actually offsets the load to the extent that it's correlated with the peak. And so this builds up into the peak load. The inset shows that in eastern Massachusetts, specifically the south region where we are, 163 megawatts of that load is really driven by EV. And to a lesser extent, it's a trend component, which is the economic activity that's happening, and not a lot of step loads. We see a lot of step loads mostly in the Metro Boston region, Metro West region, sorry. Bottom line, EV is responsible for about 70% of the demand growth in southeastern Massachusetts. Speaking of solar, the Commonwealth calls for about 6 gigawatts of solar by 2045 and 9 gigawatts by 2050. And that's just Eversource's share, right? National Grid, about the same. So they're looking at maybe 16 gigawatts to get to the 2050 goal for clean energy. Our 10-year infrastructure plan, which I'll show you in a minute what that is, achieves about 76% of that 2050 goal. So there's a gap. And this chart has a lot of lines and colors in it, but really the bottom blue section is the installed solar right now across Massachusetts, about 1.3 gigawatts of solar installed. The lighter blue is what's in the queue. So on top of the 1.6 gigawatts, we have another maybe 1.4 gigawatts in the queue. So that gets us to about 3 gigawatts of solar. The horizontal blue line is our hosting capacity at this point. So this is the ability of the grid to absorb that solar without damaging equipment, without risk of safety and reliability to customers. And that's just based on what we have out there installed right now. And as you can see, by the time we get to 2045, we have gone past the hosting capacity. Our 10-year infrastructure plan, which is a dark black line, to build new substations, to upgrade existing substations, adds hosting capacity to the system. And so that allows us to meet most of the 2045 goal and to achieve about 76% of the 2050 goal. So obviously, we still have some ways to go. And the things that we're looking at beyond 2045 is more aggressive, long-term proactive planning, which is looking at areas of the state, mostly in southeastern Massachusetts and western Massachusetts, where there may be empty land. No one has applied for interconnection because there's no infrastructure. So let's find that empty land, let's go build a substation there, and let's provide incentives for developers to connect to that substation. And if we do that in a proactive way, and Eversource is assured of recovery on that asset, that's the way we close the gap. Right now, we're providing SIPs where customers have applied for interconnection, and those are the 6 and the 7 that I mentioned before. So our ESMP plan provides 180% increase in electric hosting capacity, which means more DER, more electrification. Broken down by region, you can see in the southeastern region, 29 current bulk substations. 11 of those substations are projected to be above their firm capacity limit, which means 11 of those will be overloaded, either by load or by DER within the next 10 years. So we have to do something about those. And what we're doing is building 4 new substations. And these 4 new substations are Dennis Brewster, new substation, new Falmouth substation. There is a new East Freetown station, which I mentioned before for DER. And we're building the Sonnet substation completely, also driven by DER. So 2 substations driven by load, New Falmouth and Dennis Brewster, and 2 substations driven by DER. And then on top of that, upgrading another 7 stations. That will provide an incremental 800 megawatts of hosting capacity in the southeastern region for all of your loads, and another 1 gigawatt of hosting capacity for DER, which gets you to about 55% of the 2050 goal. So again, we are getting there. We know we have some extra work to do. What does that work entail? Before I get to that quickly, this is kind of a, this chart always gets a reaction. So this is everything that's in our capital plan over the next 10 years, just the next 10 years. And as you can see, it's a lot. It's 17 new substations, 14 driven by load, and 3 driven by DER, which are the SIPs. Right? In southeastern Massachusetts alone, it's 4 new substations, as I mentioned, and 7 upgrades. This is a tremendous amount of work. This is building more substations, more infrastructure over the next 10 years than we've built over the last 50 years. It's going to change the paradigm and the trajectory of the state. But again, all this is not driven by the state's clean energy policies in 2050. It's driven by what we're seeing occurring over the next 10 years, right? The stuff that was going to happen anyway. These are the SIPs. I won't talk about these because I think I'm hoping we're all very familiar with these. Mary Fairhaven is approved. We're waiting for 5 others. I know that we're all trying to get the DPU to approve these. And I'll just put an appeal here for anyone who wants to put a message into the DPU or to the governor about these important projects, because the Cape Cod SIP is one that's been held up now, as well as the Dartmouth Westport SIP, the Freetown SIP, the Plymouth SIP. All these, which would enable about 300 megawatts of DER that's in the queue now, waiting to be connected. It's been held up by these approvals. So let's just get it going, right? Let's put some pressure on these guys and get these projects approved. But here's where I was going to go with what, beyond 2035, beyond the next 10 years, when we look at the 2050 goals in the Clean Energy Climate Plan, there is a deficiency in southeastern Massachusetts and in Metro West. And the deficiency is because there will not be enough capacity to get to all of the EV and all of the heat pumps that the state is projecting would be on the system, would be electrified, all of the gas conversions that needs to happen by that time. And so this deficit in the southeastern region is about 1.6 gigawatts. To close that deficit, to put it into context, I would need to build an additional 11 substations in southeastern Massachusetts for that capacity. Do we have enough land to build another 11 substations? Do we have enough community support, engagement to do that? That's a question that we ask ourselves seriously. And then we ask ourselves, do we really need to build just capacity? Or are there things that we can do that are smarter, more engaging, rather than just building capacity? And so we took a look at if we did some other things, for example, increase locational incentives to drive at least 25% penetration of ground source heat pumps. So instead of everyone installing air source heat pumps, let's go to about 25% ground source heat pumps. We know it's more expensive than air source heat pumps, but also much more efficient. And because they're more efficient, it reduces the capacity demand on the system. Drive toward 100% deep energy retrofits in buildings. That's something, again, that's expensive, but if we can do that, it reduces the demand. We retain about 15% hybrid heating. That one is controversial because if you see the 2080 future of gas docket contemplates getting rid of gas completely. But across our state, there are some industries where gas is needed. There are some areas that are very difficult to electrify. And that's the portion that will probably lead to the most cost and the most infrastructure build out. So maybe there's a way that we can have a hybrid system where we retain 15% gas and electrify everything else. That would reduce the demand. It's just a suggestion. Incentivize at-work charging to minimize charging at home, and that reduces the infrastructure needed for charging. Good one, number 5, mandate solar plus storage installations with a 25% curtailment of solar. What does that mean? It means every time someone installs a solar plant, they should install storage with that plant. If you install storage, you can reduce the amount of solar interconnection requirement, because when solar is exporting onto the system, at times when the load is low, that's when problems are created. Well, if you have storage, the storage can absorb the excess solar to prevent it from being exported to the system. And so that allows you to build more solar for less cost. That would get us closer to what the state is projecting for clean energy climate plan. And then future ground-mounted solar, provide incentives to direct developers to install projects where the SIPs are, because we're building all this future capacity for SIPs. So let's use that up. And so that, again, reduces the additional infrastructure needed for SIPs. If we did all that, the chart on the right shows that you would actually reduce the deficit from 1.6 gigawatts, you'd push it down by 0.9 gigawatts. So it will be about 0.6, 0.7 gigawatt deficit. That's tremendous, because I said for 1.6 gigawatts, we need to build 11 new substations. Now we only need to build 4 or 5 new substations, much more manageable, and still be able to meet the 2050 goals. So beyond the next 10 years, we will be working with stakeholders, with the DOER, with the DPU, with every town council, with every stakeholder, so that we can drive some of these recommendations to fruition, and importantly, get you to understand and buy into this plan. And I'm right now advertising my services and my team services to come to where you are and to do a detailed walkthrough, because I'm doing something very high level here. We haven't talked about transmission. We haven't talked about offshore wind. We haven't talked significantly about stakeholder engagement. All these are important, but would love to come to where you are, bring the team, sit down, take an hour and a half, walk through the plan, and get you a buy-in, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. Eversource wants to enable it, but we're not in the business of imposing infrastructure, imposing projects on communities that don't want it. We need a community to understand the value of the infrastructure for them, particularly disadvantaged communities, environmental justice communities, who have often been burdened with infrastructure that they may not think is for them. So let's engage and let's make sure that we are bringing everyone together into a just transition. Last slide, municipal outreach. We need to build a shared understanding, collaborate and build and develop trust, and continually outreach. And we have an entire group doing that. Ronit has been a great part of that. You all know Ronit. Erin Engstrom, I may not know her. She's been leading our stakeholder engagement efforts for the ESMP. She's one of the people who will be in those meetings if you invite us to come to where you are to speak about this. I hope I've given you a good flavor of the ESMP. As far as timelines go, We have filed a plan. We've been through adjudicatory hearings with the DPU. It's now in their hands for them to approve it, which should happen sometime this summer. Okay, so I'll stop right there.